Welcome to A Quick Note, where we dive into fascinating stories from the depths of history. Today, we're exploring the captivating tale of the Andrea Doria, a once luxurious ocean liner that met a tragic fate. Join us as we unravel the mysteries and treasures hidden beneath the waves. If you enjoy intriguing stories and historical adventures, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to A Quick Note for more content. The Andrea Doria was a famous ship that sailed across the Atlantic Ocean. While it may not be as well known as the RMS Titanic, it was a source of pride for Italy after World War II. On July 26, 1956, the Andrea Doria vanished beneath the North Atlantic. Even though it's been many years since then, people are still drawn to its story. The sinking of the Andrea Doria is remembered as one of the biggest rescues at sea. Its legacy continues to capture the interest of those who are curious and daring, making it a story that's hard to forget. So, what was the Andrea Doria? The SS Andrea Doria was a fancy ship that carried passengers across the ocean. It was really big, 697 feet long and 90 feet wide at its widest part. The ship had its first journey on January 14, 1953. Even though some people heard stories about problems with its machinery, the first trip of the Andrea Doria was a huge success. They named the ship after a guy named Andrea Doria, who was an important leader from Genoa in Italy a long time ago. He was famous for being really good at leading ships in battles. In pictures, he looked like the sea god Neptune. After World War II, the Andrea Doria was known as Italy's largest, fastest, and most beautiful ship. But, to be fair, it wasn't the absolute biggest or fastest at the time. Those titles belonged to the RMS Queen Elizabeth, and the SS United States. Still, the Andrea Doria was unbeatable when it came to looking really, really nice. The Andrea Doria, being a fancy ocean liner, was like a masterpiece. The famous Italian architect Giulio Mignaletti designed it with 3 outdoor swimming pools for each class of passengers, beautiful tapestries, and lots of paintings. It was so amazing that people often called it a floating art gallery. And get this, they even had a life-sized statue of Admiral Andrea Doria on board. But, here's the thing, as dazzling as it was, the Andrea Doria is mostly remembered for something not so great. In 1956, it sank. The sad part is, the troubles didn't end on that fateful night. For years afterward, companies and individuals were still going to court, filing lawsuits for the losses and damages from that July night. So, who owned the Andrea Doria? The SS Andrea Doria belonged to a company called the Italian Line, officially known as Italia di Navigazione SpA. This company, which started in Genoa, Italy, back in 1932, was all about passenger ships. It kept running until 2002. In the tough times of World War II, the Italian Line faced some big losses. Some of their ships were either completely wrecked or taken by the Allied forces and used in their navies. Wanting to make a comeback in the late 40s and early 50s, the Italian Line decided to build 2 fancy ships, the SS Andrea Doria and the SS Cristoforo Colombo. The sinking of the Andrea Doria happened due to a mix of problems like poor communication, bad visibility, mistakes in reading equipment, and a ship that could break ice. Figuring out who was to blame for the crash is tricky because a series of unfortunate events and mistakes led to the collision. First off, the Stockholm, the other ship involved, had a strong front made for breaking ice because it often sailed in places near the Arctic Ocean. If it were a different ship that night, one without an ice-breaking front, the damage might not have been as bad. Then there's the decision-making. The person steering the Swedish ship, Third Officer Carstens Johansson, decided to change course a bit to the south. They wanted to get back to their original eastbound route. The Andrea Doria, heading west, did notice the Stockholm, but they thought they would pass each other with a safe distance of about a mile. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned. Let's be honest, the ships were getting pretty close, but it didn't seem like they were definitely going to crash. The problem was, Carstens Johansson, the person steering the Stockholm, didn't read the radar right, and they were way closer to the other ship than he thought. What makes it worse is that neither ship tried to talk to the other, even though they were supposed to be really close to each other. So, because neither ship knew about the other until it was too late, they ended up crashing at 11:10 p.m. off the New England coast. And get this, just 30 minutes after the crash, they had to start abandoning the ship. Adding to the mess, the weather was lousy. There was this thick fog, like a wall of it, making it super dangerous, especially when you have ships coming and going on the same route. Who was blamed for the sinking of the Andrea Doria? After the Andrea Doria sank, everyone started pointing fingers. The Italian line, which owned the Andrea Doria, blamed the Swedish-American line, the owners of the MS Stockholm. But guess what? The Swedish-American line did a total reverse and blamed the Italian line right back. Meanwhile, journalist Alvin Moscow said in his book that it was the Andrea Doria's fault. He wrote Collision Course, the classic story of the collision of the Andrea Doria and the Stockholm in 1959. Oh, and let's not forget the fact that the Stockholm was the one that crashed into the Andrea Doria. But, guess what? Even after all the court drama, they couldn't figure out who was really to blame. They just settled the whole thing outside of court. Both companies paid some money for the victims and took care of their own damages. The Stockholm had about $2 million in damages, while the Andrea Doria had a whopping $30 million worth. After the settlement, the investigations into the incident stopped. Looking at all the facts that everyone knows, it's safe to say that both sides messed up a bit. Maybe one more than the other. The officers in charge at the time didn't talk to each other, even though they could see each other on their radars. And then, to make things worse, they each tried to do the opposite thing to avoid crashing. Not the best plan. One big thing to consider is that the Stockholm didn't use their radar correctly. They got the distance between themselves and the Andrea Doria totally wrong, thinking it was much farther than it actually was. This small mistake ended up causing the collision. If the Stockholm had caught the mistake earlier, the Andrea Doria probably would have made it to New York without any issues. Now, let's talk about the heroes of the story, the rescuers. When the Andrea Doria was in trouble, it sparked the greatest sea rescue in maritime history. Many ships and regular people joined forces to help those on the sinking liner. Right after the crash, Captain Calamai of the Andrea Doria sent out an SOS, "We need immediate assistance." Here are some of the ships that rushed to help. 1. The Cape Ann, a 394-foot-long freighter. 2. USNS Private William H. Thomas, a United States Navy transport ship. 3. USS Edward H. Allen, a United States Navy destroyer escort. 4. USGC Laguerre, a United States Coast Guard cutter. 5. SS Ile-de-France, a French ocean liner. Right after the crash, the Andrea Doria started tilting to the side, and in nautical terms, that's called listing. It basically means the ship is leaning, probably because it's taking on water. They urgently needed lifeboats and better visibility, and thankfully, help arrived quickly after they called for assistance. Even though the Stockholm was part of the crash, they still played a role in helping the Andrea Doria. Despite their ship being seriously damaged at the front, it was still able to help with the rescue. Luckily, the Andrea Doria stayed afloat for hours after the collision, giving enough time to get people off the ship. One standout hero in this rescue mission was the Ile-de-France, a massive ship from the French line. It was one of the biggest ships on the Atlantic route that night. The Ile-de-France not only shielded the area from other incoming traffic but also provided light throughout the night for the rescue operation. This liner, along with other ships around, offered their lifeboats to save survivors. As if that wasn't generous enough, the Ile-de-France even hosted 753 Andrea Doria passengers on their promenade deck for the journey to New York Harbor. A total of 46 people lost their lives on the Andrea Doria, and an additional 5 people died on the Stockholm, making the official death toll 51 when considering both parties involved. Among the 3 classes on the Andrea Doria, first, cabin, and tourist class, the tourist class experienced higher casualties. However, the collision affected all levels of the ship where passengers were staying, including the upper, foyer, and A, B, and C decks. Fortunately, 1,660 people were rescued and survived the tragic event. One notable survivor, often called the Miracle Girl by reporters, was Linda Morgan. The impact of the Stockholm into the starboard side of the Andrea Doria tragically took the lives of her stepfather and stepsister, but miraculously, the then 14-year-old Linda was thrown onto the boat deck of the Stockholm. The crew found her with a broken arm, but otherwise uninjured. Since the sinking, 16 people have lost their lives while attempting to dive into the wreckage. Among divers, the Andrea Doria is known as the Mount Everest of wreck diving. Over time, the ship's structural integrity has significantly deteriorated. The former entrance into the wreck has collapsed, and the 697-foot site has gradually sunk lower into the North Atlantic. The Andrea Doria floated for approximately 11 hours after being struck by the Stockholm before finally capsizing at 10:09 am. To put this into perspective, the RMS Titanic sank in less than 3 hours, and the RMS Lusitania went down within 18 minutes. Given these comparisons, the collision between the Stockholm and the Andrea Doria shouldn't have resulted in a sinking. The Andrea Doria was designed to withstand such impacts. The ship had watertight compartments that were sealed, but a significant design flaw in the Andrea Doria became apparent. There was a missing watertight door that should have separated the tank pump controls from the ship's generators. Due to the location of the impact and the large hole left by the Stockholm, water started rushing into the Andrea Doria just minutes after the initial contact. Coupled with nearly empty fuel tanks, this made it impossible to correct the tilt of the ship. If the list could have been corrected, the Andrea Doria might have been able to return to New York on its own. Yes, the wreckage of the Andrea Doria has been well known and accessible to wreck divers since shortly after its sinking. Unlike the RMS Titanic, which remained missing from 1912 until its discovery in 1985, the location of the Andrea Doria was widely known. The wreck site is not a maritime mystery, and it took less than a decade after the sinking for divers to begin expeditions to the capsized ship. In fact, within 24 hours of the tragedy, divers started their journeys beneath the waves in search of the Andrea Doria. Despite extensive deterioration over the years, the Andrea Doria continues to attract brave divers, seeking a challenging underwater experience. With each dive, new artifacts from the ship have been brought to the surface. For example, the bell of the Andrea Doria was rediscovered in June 2010 by scuba divers, and the foghorn was brought to the surface in 2017, just in time for the 65-year anniversary of the sinking. Is the Andrea Doria still underwater? As of 2023, the remains of the Andrea Doria are still submerged underwater. Despite this, recovery efforts have been ongoing since the day after the sinking, no kidding. Divers have been working to retrieve treasures from the sunken liner for a long time. The wreck site is considered a challenging venture for dedicated divers, although the rapid deterioration of the wreckage has changed the nature of the dive experience over the years. How deep is the water where the Andrea Doria sank? The water at the Andrea Doria's sinking site is 240 feet deep. The ocean liner lies on its starboard side on the ocean floor. In the years after the collision, open water divers could reach the port side of the ship at depths between 160 and 180 feet. However, due to the swift currents in the North Atlantic, the Doria has experienced significant deterioration. The port side has sunk to depths lower than 190 feet over the years. Where is the Andrea Doria now? The once majestic floating art gallery, the Andrea Doria, now rests at the bottom of the North Atlantic, where it sank over 60 years ago. The wreckage is located 40 miles off the coast of Nantucket Island, Massachusetts, and lies 240 feet below the surface. Although attempts to salvage the Andrea Doria were unsuccessful, endeavors have been made to recover its treasures. In the summer of 1964, Captain Dan Turner successfully retrieved the renowned bronze statue of Admiral Andrea Doria. The statue had to be cut free from its alcove, leaving its feet and pedestal in the wreckage until the 90s, when salvage rights were obtained by John Moyer. By 2004, after undergoing restoration, the statue of Andrea Doria was returned to its homeland of Genoa, Italy. What was in the Andrea Doria safe? In 1984, the 3-ton safe from the Andrea Doria was successfully recovered, sparking rumors that it might hold precious stones, jewels, and rare coins, the kind of exciting myths that often surround sunken ships. The allure and mystery of the Andrea Doria's treasures have captured significant attention since its initial sinking. American photojournalist Peter Gimbel had been fascinated by the Andrea Doria from the moment the news broke. Just one day after the incident, he dove into the wreck and later published the photos he took in Life magazine that year. Gimbel made multiple trips to the wreckage and created 2 documentaries about it. In 1984, he, along with a team of divers that included his wife, actress Ilgar Anderson, located the Andrea Doria safe. To reach the safe, Gimbel had to cut a hole, now known as Gimbel's Hole, which many divers have since used to access the ship. The scene of opening the safe was turned into a televised event, showcasing the modern media approach. Despite high expectations, the Andrea Doria safe disappointingly contained only 50 $20 bills and Italian lira. And there you have it, the incredible journey of the Andrea Doria. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, make sure to give us a thumbs up and subscribe to A Quick Note for more quick dives into captivating stories. Until next time.